Hey, welcome back to the Pretty Podcast. I'm Lisa Smith. Today I have an amazing guest. Today we're talking with Dr. Oscar Coetzee. And Dr. Oscar has over 25 years of experience in psychology and nutrition. And he's currently serving as the Vice President of Clinical Education and Practitioner Support at Designs for Health. And Designs for Health is the number one practitioner supplement company, an amazing organization. Dr. Oscar has held faculty positions at Georgetown University, Notre Dame University, and the University of Bridgeport. He was born and raised in South Africa, bachelor's degrees in criminology and psychology, master's degrees in human nutrition and psychology, a PhD in holistic nutrition, and a doctorate of clinical nutrition. Dr. Oscar is recognized as a pioneer in nutritional science, focusing on metabolic syndrome, intestinal permeability, type 2 diabetes, sports performance, and chronic inflammatory diseases. His work is motivated by a deep commitment to revolutionizing patient care through integrated health strategies. Welcome, Dr. Oscar. It's awesome to have you on today.
Thanks, Lisa. It's good to be here. When you read that intro, it always sounds like a very smart man. I don't know if I'm really that smart.
You clearly are not satisfied with one degree. At every level, you've got two bachelors, two masters, two doctorates. So I think you've been a very busy fellow, lifelong learner.
In our little pre-discussion here, the reason for that is that you choose a career and then something happens in your life, especially in our industry, right? And somebody gets sick or you get sick or something changes in somebody's life and you go down that pathway. And for me, it was my mom. I was absolutely committed to go and do my PhD in psychology and stay in that field, and met a psychiatrist at the hospital I worked at in New Jersey, Fair Oaks Hospital. And he was like, there's something in this nutritional field of mental health. And in those days, it was like late 90s. And ironically, my mom got sick at that point, and I went down the pathway of, wow, why did she get sick? She did everything right according to what we understood at those days as what's correct. And then I went into a master's and a doctorate in nutrition and several other educational pursuits because of that change in life.
We always do seem to have that personal, we were talking off air, and we develop our expertise due to a personal attachment to something. How was that learning process for you while your mom was sick? Did you learn information that made you feel more empowered, helping through her journey?
Yeah, that's probably a separate podcast, just that one. Actually, what it was, my mom got diagnosed with a benign brain tumor, and she was in South Africa, and I was already living in the United States of America. So I flew over there, and it was just the most bizarre thing because there was a massive tumor on her brain. She went through an operation. Unfortunately, she passed away from complications from the surgery, but that literally drove me to figure out what's going on. So I really went on this rampage on artificial sweeteners and aspartame and that kind of stuff. So that's what really woke me up. I discovered in the research in those days that there were more than 500 articles written on the dangers of aspartame in glioblastoma, as well as other brain-related tumors. Nobody seems to care about that. So I think it just became a pursuit, and not to go down that road, but you always get mentors in certain areas. And there was a fantastic mentor for me in that area. His name was Dr. Woodrow Monty. And he wrote a book called While Science Sleeps, a Sweetener Kills.
Oh,
Fantastic book. You
wow.
can read everything about its associations, and talking about female health a little bit earlier, very strong connection between the use of aspartame and breast cancer in the female population. And the reason behind that, and people can argue that it's anecdotal. I don't know if it's anecdotal anymore. In my opinion, it's just not been researched in proper clinical trials. But
Right.
basically, what it is, the aspartame is a molecule that contains methanol, and the methanol converts to formaldehyde, and formaldehyde is highly sensitive in the breast tissue because we have this enzyme in the breast called alcohol dehydrogenase 1 that detoxifies ethanol or alcohol, right? But it also will take methanol because it's a very similar molecule, and then it converts this thing to formaldehyde, and the formaldehyde is clearly a dangerous entity to have in the system. So that drove me down the path of my mom, really lectured on that, studied it to the depth. And then obviously with that process, you learn more about nutrition and everything else and the other preventative stuff. So that was the path.
Wow, that is a whole other podcast. I feel so strongly about artificial sweeteners and how neurotoxic they are and just the microbiome, but I did not know the glioblastoma connection. That's fascinating. I preach on it all the time. Anytime my kids bring home anything, I'm like, what's in the back? Is there aspartame? Absolutely not.
I would even venture to say that I know everybody hates the idea of sugar, but I would rather, if you're going to drink a Coke, drink a normal Coke. Don't drink a Diet Coke. You know, that is literally, there's separate discussions about fructose corn syrup, but that stuff's nasty. Aspartame is nasty. And it's not just that. There's other things called neotame, even the whole discussion about stevia. You can go down the road because it's so much sweeter. It doesn't have the same neurotoxicity, but
Mhm.
those sweeteners have anything that is 200, 400, 800 times sweeter than sugar is going to have a dopamine reaction. And when you have a dopamine reaction, it makes it more addicting. So it's not uncommon to find people even with some of the more stevia based, and I'm not saying they're all bad, but still 200 times sweeter than sugar. So it becomes a problem from dopamine surges. And the more you have of those, the more you want.
Such a good point. And it retrains our taste buds so no longer tastes good. We expect this massive flavor of sweetness. And it's funny, recently, actually, one of my kids did get some kind of protein shake, and they said, you know what's so funny? I saw that there's aspartame in it, and I noticed that after I drink it, my cravings for sugar go way up. And I said, that's right. You're finally listening to your mom.
Yeah.
You have many areas of expertise, but today we're going to talk a lot about the microbiome. And I've seen where you hear from clinicians that there's this gap between probiotic use and supplement use in general and outcomes. How many times have you heard a client say, I don't know if that's helping me or not, and often related to probiotics? What's going on with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question because there are benefits, right? There are benefits to taking probiotics, but have to continuously take them. It's like most things, right? It's not like you can completely rejuvenate the gut if you're using aerobic strains of bacteria that are transient. And for the listeners, what that basically means is that the bacteria can live in an oxygen environment. That's what we mean with aerobic. And transient means that they're going through the system like transit, right? So think of a train or a car or something and you're on a highway. So when it's in your body, it can really have effect and expression on several mechanisms, but it doesn't stay there, right? These probiotics don't stay in our bodies. They don't necessarily engraft in our bodies. But we will talk about a couple of strains of probiotics that can, in the next couple of minutes. But overall, if you look, let's take mental health and look at probiotics and you look at bifidobacterium strains and several strains of bifidobacterium and lactobacillus are clearly indicated in improving major depressive disorders in clinical studies and several other dysthemias and anxiety and depression states. But again, if people stop taking it, the effect dissipates. So it's almost, I'm not going to compare it to a psychotropic because it certainly isn't, right? It's a lot more recognized by your body, these probiotics. But just understand that there is no permanency to those strains. They have relative abundance in the CFUs, and then people are also focused on that. And that even has been shown to not be really what people think it is. More isn't always better because these probiotics, even if you take them at that level of CFUs and you compare it to what's really in the gut, it's a drop in the bucket, right? At best. So you're really not putting that much influx into the body if you look at traditional probiotics.
Okay. So that's why people are saying, I don't know if it's helping me or not.
Correct.
Why do we hear over and over again? We see it on commercials too, but just take a probiotic. Why does that continue to be such a dominant theme from all kinds of practitioners? Allopathic medicine, functional medicine.
I think they're going by a very generalized philosophy, right? And the generalized philosophy is, hey, bacteria in our gut is really important. That's totally true. Which ones play the most important role? So clearly, the whole industry has been driven by what they can harvest and what they can market, right? So up until this point, until very recently, anaerobic strains of bacteria, which are the really important ones that we'll talk about, you haven't been able to really harvest them or get them because in the presence of oxygen, they die. So you really can't get them into the system. So I think what happens is with traditional probiotics, and I'm just going to use the mental health thing as an example. So
Okay.
normal probiotics in the form of Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus, like everybody knows, that's on your yogurt and on your fermented foods and your kimchi and your sauerkraut. Those bacteria actually in the gut help to produce what we call aromatic amino acids. Okay, so for the people at home, it's just like proteins that they produce. And then these proteins can convert to very important amino acids, and I'm sure that everybody has heard of them, called tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine. So tryptophan converts to serotonin, tyrosine converts to dopamine, and phenylalanine can convert to tyrosine. So just think of that. So these bacteria are actually making things that we can use as humans. So you have this whole symbiotic relationship. Now, let's say I'm talking about pain or I'm talking about cravings or whatever. These probiotics, if you're taking them, will have help in that category. It's going to stimulate a little bit of dopamine, it's going to stimulate a little bit of serotonin. So maybe that's the reason that they are so successful because if you stimulate serotonin, you feel good. So maybe your cravings would reduce a little bit. But at no point by taking those probiotics are you really reseeding the group. I'm not saying that taking that probiotic doesn't help you versus not taking it. It's probably better to be taking it because at least you're giving some bacterial strains in there that make some byproducts that these other guys eat, and then they produce the important things. So on paper, I would tell you that taking a probiotic is a lot better than not taking a probiotic, but here's the best example I can give you to that. So let's say we're into flowers, right? It'd be better if you can go and plant your own flower garden, grow
Mhm.
your own flowers, and then you can clip them whenever you want them and put them in the vases. And then you have this natural circulating ecosystem rather than having to go out and getting them from an outside source all the time, right? So
Mhm.
we're all into the flowers, and the flowers is our bacteria, but we need to get a lot more. Now, think of this when you're buying a vase of flowers, you're only buying 3 or 4 different flowers. When we planting flowers, we're going to have soil, microbes, earthworms, viruses, bacteria, all things that work cohesively together to make the flower. So we have a lot more of an ecosystem than just the end product. So sometimes I think these flowers are just the end products. They're not necessarily the entire system. I hope that makes sense.
It's a great analogy, and it busts some myths about gut health. We do tend to think, and honestly, I'm guilty of this too. If I take the probiotics and I feed it with prebiotics, I am seeding my microbiome. And you're saying with the normal strains, so for our listeners, lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, those are the common ones. Those are the ones we see over and over again in popular supplements, probiotic supplements, and yogurts, and as you said, in fermented foods in general. So those are the main players that we see on the market. But if I hear you correctly, you're saying those are just buying cut flowers. Do that.
Correct. Yeah,
Not
100%.
that's great to know because all the probiotics still mean that they're transient. So what do we do to seed then?
Well, you see, you brought up something very interesting there. So you are doing something good. You are doing the prebiotics, right? So the prebiotics for the listeners would be the fibers and the inulin and all these different kinds of substrates that the bacteria eat. And
Right.
then when the bacteria eat, they produce something for you that we know as short chain fatty acids.
Hmm.
So the best thing that you can do to seed your garden is to eat prebiotics, right? So if you eat the colors and the fibers and real whole food, you're actually getting there because these bacteria in our gut, and I'm going to speak specifically about 3 very important strains in the next couple of seconds, but these bacteria are the ones that then communicate and cross feed. What we're learning now is the amazing intelligence that these bacteria have when the other one becomes available, it starts communicating with the other one, and then they start forming this little circle. And it's called a cross feeding circle. And they go around and they just help each other out so immensely. It's incredible. But our modern lifestyles have completely eliminated these very baselines. So let's just start the discussion here and say, okay, we have certain bacteria in our gut that are anaerobic. So they live way down there in very non-oxygenated, high acid related areas. That's where they like living deep in the ground. Because pH, I'm sure that most people know about pH, right? It's acidic or alkaline.
Mm,
pH is very important with very specific bacteria. The way I always explain it to the layperson is some people like living in different zip codes than other people, right? And some people like to live in their communities. So that's the way bacteria is. But it doesn't mean that the communities can't help each other out,
mm,
right? Because there's roads that cross each other. This community goes to buy food at the Italian group because they like those foods, and the other guys drive over to this group because they make better cheeses. If you're looking at a big city and you have different communities living in the city, they still cohesively use the Ubers and go to the restaurants and cross each other, right? But
right.
at home, they like to live in their environment and they're just happy to be who they are. But when they go out, they'll definitely do the job. And everybody benefits because money is exchanging hands and the whole community is thriving, even though people in this zip code don't necessarily want to live in that zip code, right? So
Okay.
it's literally the way these bacterial strains work, but they have no animosity to the other strains of bacteria. So
Okay.
these anaerobic bacteria that I'm talking about, I want people to look at them as an organ, not just bacteria hanging out in your gut. It's almost like it's a kidney or a heart or a big organ system in your body that you cannot live without.
Wow.
That's really what these anaerobes are. And they are there in your gut. They're supposed to be in your gut. But modern lifestyle, high processed fat diets, antibiotics, stomach acid medications, artificial sweeteners, lack of fiber in our diet, actually lack of other species of bacteria and worms in our guts have caused this open space to be occupied by some pretty bad guys. So you need to just look at those people as these bacteria are there, but because you're not eating enough fiber, they're not a big enough community.
Mm,
Because you're eating too many processed foods, they're not a big enough community. What we want to do is get that community back to where it is.
mm.
So these particular strains that I'm talking about, I'm sure that most people have heard of a strain of bacteria called Akkermansia macinophila.
Yes.
There is something called Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, and then Roseberia, and then something called Anaerostipes. So those are like really key players of these anaerobic commensal bacteria in our gut that I want people to look at as an organ system. So forget about all the fancy names of it. Just understand that you have hundreds of them, but these ones are specifically important because they actually indicate mechanistically that they rule and regulate about 85% of metabolism in our bodies, those 4 or 5 strains of bacteria.
Amazing. But they're being wiped out by modern living.
Correct.
Antibiotics, glyphosate on our food, chemicals, toxins, poor food choices.
There is, and you know what? Even if you are on a healthy ketogenic diet, even if you're on a healthy nutrient isolation diet, you could affect these guys. Or if you're on a carnivore diet, you could affect these guys. Now, I'm not saying I'm anti-carnivore. I'm not saying I'm anti-keto. I'm just saying that if you're not diverse in what you're eating, you're not helping these guys. You might be helping other principal things that you're thinking about by weight loss and burning fat more efficiently or whatever. But systemically, you're starving them. You're driving them into a cave that they don't want to come out of.
And then the population gets smaller and smaller, just kind of like an old town that used to be in its heyday, but now it's dying out.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So how did these species, and you had mentioned cross signaling or cross feeding, how does that all factor in? Like, how does the cross signaling affect us from a way that we can actually feel the difference?
Okay, so let's start in the beginning. Let's go back about 400 or 500 years
Okay.
and we go look at the guts of more of the ancestral kind of communities that didn't have modernized food.
Hmm.
So what we found in those communities was high diversity and massive fiber intake. Okay, so fiber intake for the average American is 17 grams. The average person 500 years ago ate between 50 to 200 grams of fiber per day.
Wow.
So
10.
think of you gave seed fertilizer exponentially much more. I understand that people say, "Well, I don't live 500 years ago," and I get it. But here's the other problem that happened. So in those days, in our stomachs, we also had things called protists and helminths. So these were wormy kind of bacteria that could live cohesively in the gut. And people are all like, oh, I don't want the worms in the gut. Don't worry. In America, we've made sure that we don't have the worms in the gut. And we made sure that we don't have any protists in the gut. But that has now left what they call a niche space in your microbiome. So
Oh,
you have this area that's open And because you're not eating enough fiber, because you're not eating enough good foods, guess who's going to move in now? The bad dudes, the opportunists, the pathogens, fungi. These guys are going to come and say, hey, there's a lot of property. These apartment buildings are empty. We're just going to move in. What the hell? There's nobody living here. Nobody's even charging us taxes. Let's just come in here and throw the hardest parties that you could possibly imagine
Yeah.
because it's so easy for them to overgrow. So that's where it all started. Now, people just take a step back. So if you look at these worms or bacteria-like substances in our guts, people didn't have autoimmune diseases. People didn't have skin conditions. Eczema doesn't exist in people that have low-level worms. So it's almost like the immune system knows what it needs to do because it has more important business to take care of than a food allergy or gluten or dairy. It doesn't get aggressive with things because it doesn't have anything to do.
Mm.
So my argument is we're not going to bring the produce back, but why not put the other guys and have them fill that niche space? Why don't you give these anaerobes an opportunity to go fill that niche space? And if you can get your diet to 50 to 70 grams of fiber a day, which I wouldn't recommend to do overnight, you will actually activate them because they are a dormancy bacterial strain that would be in your gut and they want to come out. They want to live.
Okay, so Oscar, we read and hear about you've wiped out these species entirely and now you have to reseed. Is that a thing? Or do these lifestyle things we've talked about just wipe them down to such a minimal level that they're not effective and they're not keeping the bad guys out?
Look, I mean, we have an advantage nowadays because we can look at functional stool testing. We
Yeah.
can go into a GI map or a GIFX or whatever company people prefer to do, and we can look at a very sub level of these microbes. So what is shocking is when people come into your office, and I'm sure you've experienced the same as a clinician, you see a lot of low Akkermansia. You see low Akkermansia, low Roseberia, F. prau, Anaerostipes. You see all these species that are really important. Detectably low doesn't mean that they don't exist. It just means that they're hanging on by a thread. When you have low anaerobic keystone commensals, you're going to have chronic disease. It's impossible not to have it because those things are the things that activate our immune cells, rejuvenate our immune system. They are the things that protect the gut barrier not to get leaky gut, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners know about. That is their key job. So if you go in there and you say to them, hey, I'm going to give you that piece of land and I'm going to give you the food to make you happy. Are you guys willing to come out of hiding in your small community and just flourish? And they are going to say, thanks, Lisa. I've been waiting for this for the last 18 years since you haven't been eating fiber. We've been living off the scraps of the other bacteria that you've been giving us. So thanks for taking those probiotics because at least we were able to hang out in the caves, but now we can come and flourish again. So that's why I also think that if you make the smallest amount of changes in your diet, like you start eating a little bit more whole food, you put more colors on your plate, you're feeding those guys that are hiding in the caves. So it doesn't mean that you're going to have them flourish overnight. That's why the reseeding thing would be more taking some of these anaerobic strains, which we can do now in a capsule form, put them in your body, and then do the right things. Now, please understand, it's just like any other seed. If I put that in your body and you eat a crappy diet for the rest of your life, then you would need to stay on that strain.
Nah.
If you put that in your body and you eat more diverse and seasonally and colors and fibers, you might need to just do the probiotic 4 times a year just to make sure that you cover the basics. So the whole idea behind this is not to give you a probiotic for the rest of your life. It's giving you a probiotic that seeds the environment to plant your own flower garden.
Very good and encouraging. How
Very.
weird, you and I talked about this off air, that even in the functional medicine world, there is still a model that some practitioners follow that's very similar to traditional medicine, which is a pill for an ill. Oh, you have leaky gut? I will give you these supplements and we'll just keep you on them. But the outcomes are that never fully resolve. So then you have to stay on it again and longer, and it gets extremely frustrating, expensive, and compliance starts to plummet. This is very helpful and doable for all of us. Let's talk about the actual real benefits to immunity and to gut health. So, going on a short course of anaerobic probiotics, and then how do we feed them? Let's get really tactical.
Okay. So the best way to do this, and actually we're doing some research in this now because we're in the field. So we've started to feed these strains. And let me just tell the listeners what we are doing right now is literally revolutionary. Nobody has really ever looked at this. We've always assumed that polyphenols and the colors and the fibers are feeding all these guys. And
Hmm.
we're now finding that they don't. We find that certain things eat things more than other things. And
Okay.
that's so, for instance, I'll give you an idea. We have a product in our line called phytobiome. That's a product that we put together full of polyphenols because of all the literature and the science that we've looked at, that it feeds all the bacteria. So we have this anaerobic strain, Anaerostipes cacao, which is the first launch, and we have another one launching now this next week, actually. This strain of anaerobe, we gave it phytobiome and it ate it, but it wasn't like, it's not really my favorite chocolate cake. And then we said to this microbiologist, hey, feed this thing various products that we have, greens, reds, yellows, pinks,
Yeah.
fiber. And this thing went crazy when we gave it greens.
Uh,
Loved it. Totally went off its rocker, almost the same as eating what it normally likes to eat, which is lactate, lactic acid. It's what this bacteria
oh,
feeds off,
interesting.
which is something ironically that bifidobacterium produces, right? So there is a benefit. So as I was saying that there's food that feeds these guys in the cave, your probiotics was helping them out, but not reseeding them.
Throwing them some
So
scraps.
yeah, exactly. So what I'm trying to say is that we are now learning and we are going to further investigate. As a matter of fact, we have research going on right now is within the next 6 months, we're going to be able to tell you that F-Prow, Akkermansia, Anaerostipes, you need to take this with that to
Oh,
seed it perfectly.
cool.
This with that to seed it perfectly in the initial phases. After that, just eat seasonally, eat colors, eat variety. That's the real concept behind this. Then you fertilize it, you water it basically. So, what happens if I decide I'm feeling so great now, I'm going to start eating pizza and drinking Diet Coke again for the next 6 months?
No.
You're going to go backwards, right? But at that point, you can take this anaerobe to cover it. So, what I'm trying to say is for the first time, we're starting to understand that maybe there is something that we can do when we're not perfect to compensate for what we're doing. And
That's
I'm not a proponent of that approach, but it is the realistic thing that we have to accept from the average patient. They're not going to be as compliant as the fully dedicated functional medical doctor. But if you can replenish these anaerobes and support these anaerobes on a consistent basis, you can maybe override some of the bad stuff that we do to our bodies.
what I appreciate about that so much is that as a practitioner, I've always said you eat to live, but along those lines, we are human and food is a huge part of our celebrations. So when people would say, Christmas is coming, you've just taught me, I've had this, been with you 12 weeks in this weight loss course. What do I do? And I said, you eat the Christmas cookies. Just you don't eat,
Exactly.
you just don't eat three handfuls for breakfast. You
Yeah.
live, what do you do at Thanksgiving? You eat the pumpkin pie, the birthday cake at birthday, because we celebrate. That brings us so many endorphins and neurotransmitters and communal love that we don't that's not bad.
Yeah.
But now there's this, oh, not only is it not bad, but I'm also not wrecking all the progress I've made for 12 weeks, right? Because that's the fear in the back of someone's mind is, oh my gosh, I've lost weight. I feel better. My inflammation is down. My face looks younger already. But now I'm going to ruin it all because I'm going on vacation. That mindset.
Here's what you probably would agree with me, Lisa. And this is something I actually want to bring up because it's really something that irritates me. Like, I get really irritated when my students or people that I teach at college level or whether it's practitioner level, oh, I put Joan on a FODMAPs diet and she's great. No, if you have to put Joan on a FODMAPs diet for the rest of her life to cover symptomology, you're doing nothing because how many good foods are on a FODMAPs elimination diet that's good for the commensal bacteria? But at that point, you're so dysbiotic or so imbalanced that you can't tolerate some of those foods. So I've always said to people, the only way to measure true health is an individual that can literally eat anything without a reaction once they've gone through a healing phase. They should be able to eat a really crappy food without a reaction. Maybe they'll feel a little nauseous or whatever because they haven't had that fried food experience. But you shouldn't be on lying on your bed for 5 days because you ate a chicken finger or a fry. You shouldn't have to do that. That's a
Mhm.
clear indication that there's something going on in your gut. And if you've ever run a lot of food allergy panels or food sensitivity panels,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you have 50 food sensitivities, those aren't really food sensitivities as much as it's an indication of permeation or a
Mm.
lot of issues with your immune system reacting to certain foods. You need to get the tight junctions in the gut completely fixed so that your body can tolerate more foods. Now, you will tolerate a lot more if you eat 80 to 85% of your diet real food. Then I always tell my people, I don't care what you do the rest of the time. Because as you improve your gut and your health, you don't crave as much rubbish. You're not going to go on those binges that you used to go on because you're naturally high in dopamine. You don't need to eat 5 cookies to get the dopamine surge. So
Exactly.
the satiety thing changes when the anaerobes and the bacteria in your gut become more diverse. It's an unbelievable gut-brain thing.
It truly is. And you're also knocking back some other pathogenic players such as Candida and other things that are also contributing to those cravings. I'm with you with that 85% rule. I actually, in my office, used to have a yellow sticky that said, eat 85%.
No kidding.
Great. Yeah, I did. I had it right there just to remind people, eat 85% great, and the rest of the time, don't worry about it. Real quick, and then we're going to move off this topic to the next because there's so many we could talk about. Once you establish, bring back the anaerobes and they're flourishing, does that also contribute to repairing those tight junctions, or
Oh,
do you need
yes.
other things like L-glutamines and carnosine, slippery elm, mucilaginous herbs? So help me with that too.
Those things are really good and important when you're going through the phase of healing and the person is inflamed because they react to so many foods. Once you put these anaerobes into the body, think of what they do, right? They produce these very unique short chain fatty acids which are called acetate, propionate, and butyrate. So these short chain fatty acids are then the healing molecules in the rest of your gut. So the butyrate by itself is going to help communicate in the mucin layer to the cells, go back to acromancy, and this whole process of cross feeding starts to happen. So the body starts to self-regulate itself completely. And you, before we move off this topic, you brought up something really interesting, the opportunists and the pathogens.
Hmm.
See, if you look at a stool test and your anaerobes are low,
Yeah.
it's no different than me looking outside in a yard where the soil has been damaged and weeds coming up.
Yes.
Weeds are not bad things. They're just very resilient plants that are trying to reestablish the environment. So us going out and killing the weeds is actually not a good idea because these things are actually putting certain pH and things in the soil for the other plants to grow. It brings bugs there that can pollinize and bring other things into the equation. So weeds are literally the bad bacteria in our gut when we look at a stool test. The body is just saying, hey, this environment's not good, don't kill me. I'm just telling you. So what you do is you crowd them out. So
Perfect.
we are literally going to go into a future where I think the antimicrobial scenario is going to be phased out. Because if these anaerobes come in, they cohesively crowd out opportunistic and pathogenic bacteria. That's their job. So part of what they do is when they fill in those gaps, they change the pH, and these bad guys cannot live in that environment. So they
Mm.
move out of that zip code and they go somewhere else. So it becomes a complete balance. And I'll tell you why we know this. We do a lot of clinical trials. So we ran this clinical trial on this anaerostipes probiotic that we had on a person with severe food sensitivities.
Hmm.
We told her to keep eating the food sensitivity foods, but just take the probiotic. Within 5 weeks, she was able to eat everything without
Really?
a reaction. And then when we ran a pre and post stool test on her, we saw that Akkermansia was detectably low. It normalized, but we never gave her Akkermansia. We just gave her one of the strains that connects to the Akkermansia. And it crowded out all the opportunists, which was to me the most mind-blowing thing because I never thought that would happen. I just thought that it will help the permeation, but I didn't think that one strain of an anaerobe could go in there and take a really bad opportunist like Pseudomonas or Klebsiella and
Mhm.
crowd it out in 12 weeks. So we're doing deeper dive clinical trials on that now on a higher, larger population. And we publish this in peer-reviewed journals, by the way, and it's really remarkable. What I'm most excited about, I think we're on the threshold of understanding that the microbiome, if properly fed and properly seeded, can crowd out bad guys without using long-term antimicrobials.
Oh my, that is profound.
Yes,
The
very
implications of that are it actually wipes out a whole bunch of other supplements that people are taking.
correct.
What is the name of that one again?
Anaerostipes, it's spelled
Uh,
Anearostipes. If you go onto our website, designsforhealth.com, you put in probiotic, it'll be one of the first ones that shows up.
okay.
It's Anaerostipes cacae, which is the name of the actual anaerobe. So that is the name of the product. And then the other product that we're launching middle of April is called Complete Commensal, and that contains some of the other anaerobes, which is Akkermansia, F. prau, Roseberia, and a couple of the Bifidobacterium species, very deep down Bifidobacterium species that aren't normally found in normal probiotics.
So the
The
anaerostipies,
piece?
that
Yeah.
that is the one that helps to promote your body's own growth of the anaerobic bacteria, such as Akkermansia or
Yeah, but we didn't know that. So this person, when we did a first stool test, she was low in Akkermansia and low in F. prau.
yeah.
We gave her the Anaerostipes because the Anaerostipes is the largest butyrate producing
Ah, okay.
keystone. Okay.
That's
And we gave it to her is because we know our hypothesis in the clinical trial was we want to improve tight junction problems with food intolerances and sensitivities. That's the
Mhm.
whole idea behind the study. We wanted to show that if you take this probiotic, you could probably manage non-anaphylactic. I'm not talking about anaphylactic stuff. I'm talking
Right,
about the
right.
sensitivities, the dairy that bloats you and the cabbage that you eat that bloats you. We're talking about that.
Yeah,
And this person was eating these foods while she was taking this probiotic and could eat the foods with no
right.
symptoms.
You were thinking one thing and it did that, but it also had this other huge benefit.
Exactly. So
Cool.
that's when we thought, okay, this is something huge because now I'm running a clinical trial on about 25 subjects in a much more controlled environment. So we have them starting on day X, finishing on day Y. They have stool tests done, they have food sensitivities done, and we have a gut questionnaire. So we're testing this thing on 3 levels of biometrics, and then we're going to do a post. But what we're basically saying to them is eat what you normally eat. We're not interfering with that. We're not adding more fiber into the equation. Now we have that data analytics to compare to. And then we're doing the same thing in the complete commensal. The complete commensal is a more diverse group of 5 keystones.
Yeah.
And these 5 keystones modulate 85% of what we know to be immune metabolism functioning in the body.
Okay. So if someone were to take those together, would you hypothesize leaky gut problems start to clear up?
Yes.
Clear up. What that means for our listeners is what we see with leaky gut and then dysbiosis, which means we've got the overgrowth of the bad guys. We'll
Yeah.
call them bad guys. So you got an overgrowth of the bad guys, you got holes in your digestive tract. It's allowing then these surface byproducts on the bad guys, which are toxins, to leak through the LPS. Now we've got systemic inflammation. So
Correct.
once you tighten up those, so you plug the holes in the hose, you bring down the inflammation, and then you move the bad guys out to another neighborhood and you fill it with good guys. Now you've really got a whole new, you can tolerate foods, you're not as achy, you're not aging as quickly, you don't have gut reactions, you don't have joint pain, you don't have eczema, whole bunch of downstream outcomes.
It's funny you say that. So there's a recent study that I looked at with the whole anti-aging longevity thing.
Hmm.
If you take these anaerobes, they actually help stem cell rejuvenation.
Oh my gosh. Really?
Yeah, so this is an animal models, okay, so a little bit
Like
beyond
mouse models?
yeah,
Yeah,
but that is clearly, whoa, that's
that's
interesting.
cool.
It's almost like you're doing a fecal transplant from a healthy donor, but it's not a fecal transplant.
So much less invasive.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we could keep going, but I want us to talk about some other things because you have a lot to
Sure.
bring to us. You've developed, I would call it a field, psychoneutrogenomics.
Yeah,
We know epigenetics, so I know my listeners have heard me say this. They're probably like my kids rolling their eyes right now. Genetics load the gun and epigenetics pull the trigger. But let's
correct.
talk about psychoneutrogenomics. What is this?
Yeah, so I practiced psychology for maybe 5, 7 years of my life in the clinical setting where I was working in suicide intervention, clinical depression counseling, codependency counseling, drug and alcohol counseling, all the typical scenarios. And I just felt that psychotherapy, psychological assistance as a therapist or a psychologist had influence in my patients, but it didn't change that much, right? People were able to talk about their problems, they were able to acknowledge their problems. And I'm not now talking about deep-rooted psychological problems. That's a different PTSD kind of standard. I'm talking about the person that is running around depressed and anxious and they don't really know why. They don't really like their job, but they don't hate their job. They're in an okay relationship. It's like, why am I so anxious and depressed? So
And
I know
slap.
that for those people, psychotherapy really doesn't do anything because the problem isn't deep-rooted psychology. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have psychiatry. Psychiatry is giving you a drug for a scenario, and that's very experimental. The psycho is the psychology. It's very important to have a psychological connection with your patient. That patient needs to be motivated. So a lot of what we do, we imparting some of that motivation and excitement because we talk the talk and we walk the walk. So you are providing the psychological support. And if that person believes in what you tell them, then you can at least have that cheerleader motivation side of it covered. So that's the psycho side of it. Then the nutri side of it is nutrition, right? So I'm a big believer that anxiety and depression and dysthymia is completely misdiagnosed in this country because they're never looking at the nutri part of the psychonutrigenomics. And the nutri part is, do you have all the B vitamins? If you don't have all the B vitamins, you'll have psychiatric problems. Do you have vitamin D at a status that it needs to be? Are you anemic? Do you have hypoglycemia? Do you have hypothyroidism? Do you have blood sugar dysregulation? If you fix all those things, most of the anxiety and depression for the average person improves dramatically. So
Yeah.
nobody is checking those boxes. And if you want to go into scientific literature and read on anxiety and depression, see how many papers are published on low vitamin D levels. See how many papers are published on low vitamin B levels. See how many papers are published on low fiber intake and anxiety and depression. Antibiotic intake and anxiety and depression. If you take an antibiotic, one antibiotic increases anxiety and depression by 50%.
Wow.
Right. Yes. If you take two antibiotics, it could be 75. If you take three or more antibiotics, it could be psychosis within 6 months.
Wow.
And that's
Why?
data that's out there. So the psychonutrigenomic thing came from I practice psychology. I have a very advanced nutrition space, and in my nutrition space, I looked at the genetic components. So I would normally look at Nutri first, going to
Mhm.
make sure that all those categories that I mentioned are taken into consideration, making sure that there are no underlying PTSD related issues that could be a driver for us. And on
Mhm.
the other side, my final component, is there a genetic component? Do you have an issue with converting tryptophan or tyrosine? Do you have a dopamine gene? Do you have some correlated genetic? Now, the genomic part of me, like you, is not the most, it's the most intimidating because it's the most complex with all the genes and the SNPs, but it's the least worrisome to me
Yeah.
because we can help a person express those genes differently in almost most cases. So if you an underconverter of dopamine, we can give you dopaminergic precursors. We can give you dopamine surging nutraceuticals. There's many things that we can do to help overcome the issue. So I like to look at that, but the genomic component is the final one I look at if the other ones didn't turn out to give me the answers, because I completely agree with you. What difference does it make what your genes are? Because you can't change them. But what you can do is if you can't figure out, hey, Oscar, my anxiety has improved 60%, my depression has improved 80%. I got to go dig into the genes a little bit and see if there's something I need to do to address that. And that's how that whole field started.
So,
I look at genetics as a road in front of your house. Okay. That road might have potholes. So you can do one of three things. You can be an idiot and drive as hard as you can through the potholes and cut your tires. Or you can slow down and go through the potholes a little bit slower, which will still damage the tire, but it's not going to destroy the tire forever.
Hmm.
Or you can fill the potholes in with a little bit of gravel, and that's going to last a little bit longer than driving through them. Okay, so let's take this analogy back. If you take your car and you drive through the potholes at full speed, you don't care about your genes. You know you have bad genes. So if you have ApoE4 gene and you have a higher risk of Alzheimer's or whatever, you're doing everything that drives Alzheimer's. You have blood sugar problems, you smoke, you drink, you're driving your car as hard as you can through the potholes. Sorry, that's just being stupid. But you could also say, okay, I have the genes. I'm just going to clean up my lifestyle a little bit. I'm going to smoke a little bit less, and you driving through the potholes a little bit slower. Or you can fill it in and say, I'm going to take supplements to try and override, or lifestyle changes to try and override or express my gene differently. And that's putting sand in the potholes. It's never going to be a perfect piece of road, but that would be the most logical thing to do, in my opinion. Why don't you just fill it up with gravel as long as you can? And when it goes out, you put more in. And that's the same thing with the supplement. For some reason, genetically, you're not really good at making X, Y, or Z. So just take it and
Yeah.
override it. But the big thing that people don't understand, your weakest gene is probably the one that's going to take you out eventually anyway. That's the one that's your weakest link in the chain. For me, I've got cardiovascular genes that aren't great. So I
Mm.
don't smoke, I hardly drink, I train. But if I live to be 95, that's probably the puppy that's going to kick me out. My heart's probably going to say, I'm out. Brain's probably going to be okay, but the heart's going to be like, nah, dude, I've had enough. I'm out
Yeah.
because it's the weakest link. So I can extend that, but it's never going to become a stronger link. Always going to be the weakest link, right?
And just to take your point a little bit further, Oscar, if we apply those same lifestyle decisions you make from an epigenetic standpoint to at least minimize the effect that geneticness has in your life, those same lifestyles apply to me if I happen to have genetics that make me more prone to cancer. The
Correct.
same
Yeah.
healthy, if I don't smoke, I keep drinking to a minimal, I eat whole foods, I exercise and train. Regardless, this is the way I look at the epigenetics and the genetic testing, and which is why I see them not as the main player either. I'm agreeing with you, is that it's the same lifestyle recommendations and dietary. Now we can dial those in, but if we take the big brush strokes, they apply to all of life and they help all of us, and then we can personalize it at some point.
This is why I keep telling my students, they're like, listen, I'm going to tell you guys a secret, okay? And you shouldn't tell your patients this ever. And I know the patients are listening. I
So
said,
it's our
listen,
secret here.
if you tell people to eat real food
Hmm.
85% of the time, as much organic as they can, and if they can't, still eat real food,
Yeah,
right? Eat food that goes bad quickly. So if you leave it on a table for a day, it should be disgusting. You can't eat it. Don't want to eat anything that looks like you can eat it a day late if it's
right.
lying in a hot room. And that is probably 80% of all diseases.
Yes.
Cancer prevention, pre-diabetes reversal, diabetes potential reversal, get those blood sugars back to normal, weight loss resistance. And you know why? I always thought that I'm the smart guy, right? So I designed this program 20 years ago in one of my degrees where I was doing research on metabolic syndrome. So I wanted to prove that I can reverse metabolic syndrome with a whole food diet and 3 days a week of exercise because it just made sense to me with all the science that I looked at. So I gave people carrot juice and superfood and greens and ate fish and vegetables and boom. This is a peer-reviewed publication, by the way, and 77 people, we reversed it 100%, like literally reversed metabolic syndrome in every single individual out of supplement.
Wow.
Today, I look at that same research, that publication, and I'll be happy to forward you the publication.
Yeah.
And I look at it now and I'm like, oh, now I understand why that worked. Because it was feeding the freaking anaerobes.
Oh,
That's why.
all along. Now that you know even more
Yeah,
than you knew then.
correct. So it made those anaerobes happy because I was giving them tons of fiber, tons of color, and they just came alive.
Yeah.
And now all the metabolism changed. The weight loss was a complete residual benefit of the upregulation of all those other things. If you eat real food, you're probably going to solve most of the problems. If your gut is really a mess at this point and you can't eat all the different kinds of whole foods, then you probably want to go more down to what we spoke about earlier.
The anaerobes. I'm going to link the supplements we talked about in the show notes because I can see where this could have a tremendous impact on people who've just
Oh yeah.
they've been to the practitioners, even the functional medicine ones, and they've worked on leaky gut, but it just never clears up. And that's why, because they're not getting those anaerobes back up and flourishing. In addition to those, would I also include the greens powder in case someone is looking, they're like, I'm not ready to go full blown 50 grams of fiber. Not
Oh,
recommending that.
no.
We're recommending go and
Yeah.
slow to increase fiber. But the greens you said are the main thing that it went crazy on in your study. Is that right?
Yeah,
Other
and if you're not a vegetable person, yeah, our powdered greens, the ones that we researched that really blew off the charts was Essentia greens and reds. This is the thing that for some reason was feeding these guys like
that's
they
cool.
were having a party or something. They absolutely loved this stuff. Clearly, it would make sense now if you're taking the anaerostipes to take the Essentia greens. Now, with a complete commensal that we're launching, we don't yet know exactly what's feeding it, but I can almost tell you can't go wrong with this at this point. The worst thing that we can say to you is it only feeds at 40%, but this feeds at 80%.
Mhm.
That's where we're going to have but it's all going to be related to food particles in the form of polyphenols and colors. And for the average listener, if they don't know what all that means, is the more diverse you eat and the more seasonal you eat, the more you'll be feeding your microbes.
Thank you. We're eating the rainbow. And
Yeah,
that's because the colors are the polyphenols, which become the food, are
the
good
bacteria. And
for.
then they make the things that we need to get our immune system up to par and to get our weight under control. GLP-1s, everybody knows about GLP-1s and GLP-1 medications and GLP-1 this and that. You have 6 areas in your gut that naturally produces GLP-1s. And these anaerobes on their own activate about 3 of them.
Wow.
So you're naturally producing GLP-1s in your body if your
Mhm.
gut gets healthier.
Again, and some of those other lifestyle
Yeah.
issues we talked about also increase your own GLP-1
Yeah.
production. Right before we wrap up, the last question, and then I'll ask how people can find out more about you, the products, designs for health. Sometimes people like to take the end product, the postbiotics, which you have mentioned are the short chain fatty acids, the butyrates, and the combo products. Is that kind of like a shortcut that also is transient because again, we haven't gone back to build the army that makes it naturally?
It's a really good question, and I'll tell you why. So I've got 2 answers to that. The microbiology experts that we work with, the guys that really study microbes and know the things a lot better than me, will tell you that the normal butyrate salts do not make it down there. They don't really have the same effectiveness. So taking the anaerostipes, that is the biggest butyrate producer, is the best way to go. I will say to you that let's say I have a very sterile gut. And for a person that's listening, what is a sterile gut? A person with low everything. They're low good guys, they have low bad guys, they just not good. So for a person like that, I sometimes might take tributyrin, it's our product of butyrate, it in there to at least change the pH. I'm
Oh,
changing the zip code a little bit more when the good guy comes down. He's not scared because it's all non-acidic,
it's friendly
right? Yeah,
territory.
it's friendly territory, so he can get better. So this is just my own hypothesis. So I would, in a very sterile person who's been on antibiotics a long time, or a person that's been taking proton pump inhibitors or stomach acid medication for 20 years, those people probably need the butyrate as the entry point. It's like the first part of the massage before we get to the deep tissue, get the butyrate in there. So I still feel that there's place for that.
Okay.
The glutamine and the N-acetylglucosamine and all these things that heal the gut lining, take them by all means while you're going through that healing process because there's going to be die off, there's going to be some small bloating periods as your body figures out who lives where. But once you've done that and you're not reactive anymore and you don't bloat and look 6 months pregnant after you eat a half a pear,
Right.
you don't need to do any of that anymore. So then you can just focus on the rest of what you're supposed to be doing.
So helpful. I have way more questions for you, but we did hit on some pretty important ones that can be life-changing. Absolutely life-changing as people start to do these. And you can take this very slowly, step by step. And an
Yes,
easy way to do is just add more vegetables, seasonal vegetables to your grocery basket. That's
correct.
step number one right there. That will automatically begin to change that ecosystem.
And if you do that, Lisa, and you still feel a little bloated, because that's the reason that sometimes people don't eat vegetables. It's not because they deliberately want to not eat them. It's just that they bloat. So if you start taking this anaerostipes cacae that I spoke about, keep taking that while you're eating the food until that thing breaks, until that bloating starts to go away, because it will take a little time for that to find its way. Listen, I love being on your podcast. I don't have a lack of things to talk about,
Yeah.
but I would be happy to come back at some point once we've published these research papers in about 12 weeks is when we'll have the results, and I can come back on if you wanted to and talk to you about the results of the bigger anaerostipy study as well
Yeah.
as the complete commensal investigation.
I also want to talk about functional blood chemistry and how that differs from normal labs, although you're using normal labs. So, yes, let's absolutely do that. I know
Cool.
we need to wrap up for today, but thank you so much for coming on. Now, before we go, share with our listeners how best to find you, Designs for Health, how best to connect.
If you go online and you just put in designsforhealth.com, or one word, designsforhealth.com, you get to our website. And if you go to the education page or the leadership page on our website, you'll be able to find me. You can reach me at ocoetzee, OCOETZEE, at designsforhealth.com. We are a practitioner brand only, but we can put you in contact with the proper practitioners. And I'm sure, Lisa, you're a practitioner. So the distribution of anything that we do would have to go through a person like you. And the reason that we do that is because of quality, number one, and supplements can be dangerous. If you take the wrong thing at the wrong time in a non-clinical application, that could be risky. And I think that's where we leave it in the hands of the practitioners. From an education standpoint, we as a company build really strong, rigorous education for our practitioners. So everybody is going to go through this vast learning collective that I'm building out on these commensals, that they'll understand how it works and why it works and whether you should make that recommendation. I will say this though, is there anybody in the United States of America that can't benefit from an anaerobic keystone bacteria? Probably not. I
Yeah.
take it. I've been taking it for a while. And for a person with a supposedly healthy microbiome, what you will find is maybe your poop gets a little better or fuller or whatever. It's not always taking a probiotic to see if you feel better. It's just making sense that you should. But I will say that if you really want to make sure you should take something, then test. Either do functional stool testing, organic acid testing, or what you were saying quickly about functional lab testing. And for the viewers, that is literally just looking at blood work more from a preventative than a disease paradigm standpoint. So
Mm,
I always look at that as we have an optimal state of health, we have a disease state of health, and then we have a limbo state of health. And
mm.
most of us are in the middle, so call that the yellow light. We're trying to get you to the green light. We want to stay away from the red light. Most medical doctors in standard blood work look at the red light. Do you have diabetes? Don't you have diabetes? Oh, you're almost diabetic. Come back in 6 months to see where you stand. We
Yeah.
don't want, we want to take you out of the yellow light and put you in the green light. And that's what functional blood chemistry does. We can look at a problem before it becomes a problem. And if we see something in that blood work that's indicating a problem, then we do further testing of a functional kind, which would be more organic acid based or functional stool testing or food sensitivities.
I love that. And thank you for your generosity in summarizing that for us. I know you're short on time, but the distinction in traditional medicine is there is no yellow light. You're either
Yeah.
green or you're red. And so come and say, I feel terrible. No, you're in the green. They're not actually in the green, yellow.
Right.
We know it's just not how it's looked at in
Yeah.
allopathic medicine. Yeah, we will definitely follow up after you've run these clinical research studies and we'll want to hear all about it. And then we'll do a deeper dive into that blood chemistry so that people, because they often say, I'm told my thyroid is fine, but I don't feel fine. There's
Exactly.
good things
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
unpacking.
Yeah. We'll discuss the yellow light assessment on blood work, and that's literally what we're doing. We design these parameters to determine, like you just said, are you in the yellow? And
Right.
most people are, right? You're either progressing towards the disease or you're progressing away from disease. There's really no middle point. So you always want to strive towards the green at minimum and not just accept that you're in the yellow, because the yellow is generally going to go the other way.
Exactly. I so appreciate you. Thank you
No
for
problem.
today. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And guys, thanks for joining us. I'll be back next week. Until then, stay pretty well. Bye.